Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Office Hours. I'm your host, Stuart Newsom, and today we have joining us Rick Tully, is our Executive Director of Revenue Cycle Management here at Infinix. So how's it going today, Rick?
It's going pretty well. Looking forward to this session and the upcoming weekend.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Yeah, we're all working for the weekend, right?
That's right.
It's an old 80s song. Rick, before we dive in to our main topics, just want to, if you could give everyone a little bit of background of what your role is at Infinix.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the leader of RCM Acute Services for all of our RCM services clients. I'm responsible for coding all back-end revenue cycle processes, billing, AR management, denials management, cash posting, in some cases, customer service and self-pay.
Awesome, awesome. Um, so definitely you're the expert that we were wanting for this particular topic today, because I think you had some real life experiences that bring a unique perspective, so to speak. I think everyone is talking about cybersecurity and the incident that happened with Change Healthcare, as well as recently with CloudStrike. So obviously our title today for this session is Shielding Healthcare, Contingency Plans for Cyber Attacks. So this subject was really motivated, or actually the subject matter behind this um, was just how do you build a robust contingency plan to protect healthcare organizations from devastating effects such as cyber attacks? And so Rick brings, again, that unique perspective because he's actually lived this with one of our strategic clients that he'll get into a little bit more as we dive a little deeper. So what you can expect from today's session is it's effectively learning the critical steps and strategies to implement immediately after a cyber attack to help mitigate some of the damages, ensure operational continuity, if you will. Also going to discover the importance of backup clearinghouses, that whole concept of having a backup clearinghouse, and the challenges of maintaining compliance with some of the industry standards, such as 837 file formats, during and even after a cyber attack. And we're also going to explore automation. You know, we always talk about automation here at Infinix. It certainly is applies here. But how can automation aid in recovery efforts and enhance efficiencies and identify some of those proactive measures that healthcare organizations can take to strengthen their cybersecurity posture, as well as reduce the risk of future attacks? Um, so before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone once again, if you've attended our webinars before, we always have a Q&A at the end of the session. So I encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A section, and Rick and myself will do our best to answer those. And like always, if we don't have the answer today, we will find the answer and send it to you separately. So Rick, I know I tried to do a little justice in framing this. Could you frame a little bit as to why this topic is so important today? Kind of your experience, just set up for some of the questions that I'm going to be asking you.
Yeah, absolutely. So having these backup plans or contingency plans for a clearinghouse or billing scrubber or whatever term you want to use, we learned very quickly that is very necessary. I think for most of us that are participating today, we're probably using Change Healthcare or we're using a clearinghouse that is connected to Change Healthcare. So we're very dependent on a single software type vendor that I think in a lot of ways we took for granted. We knew they would always be there, and nobody from an operations perspective ever thought that they could be taken down at a moment's notice and
Right.
also cripple an organization from a cash flow perspective, from a process perspective, et cetera.
Mhm.
You know, if you don't have a strong cash on hand days, this could be very detrimental. So I think what I learned very quickly is it's necessary, if your budget permits, to have a backup plan in place, whether that's, contracting with another clearinghouse, having, resources available to you, such as Ability or Navinet, to where you can manually upload claims should something happen to this degree.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I think everyone took for granted, got lulled into, oh, it's going to always be there, indestructible, because surely everyone in the healthcare industries, there's a lot of cyber security requirements with, and organizations like High Trust and ENAC and SOC 2 and things of that nature, that we're following those guidelines, but still you got to stay a step ahead of the bad guys. And there's a lot of bad players out there. So staying a step ahead is always the challenge. But I want to start first with your initial response to the Change Healthcare cyber attack. Can you walk us through the immediate steps you took to mitigate the impact? So, it happens, you're in the moment, and all of a sudden you're going, okay, wow, I got to do something. What was your immediate response?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll use as an example and walk you through what we did with one of our strategic clients who is a regional hospital. They're freestanding, non-affiliated. Every dollar counts. If there is any fluctuation in their cash flow, they feel it. So when the Change Healthcare outage occurred, which was right on February 20th, we were down. Isn't typical of Change Healthcare to go down for any extended period of time. We were down 24 hours without any real response from them. Once we heard that it was a cyber attack, I think it was the very next day, knowing how this works and that ransomware was involved, that there was going to be law enforcement investigations, etc. This wasn't going to be we just flip a switch and everything's back to normal. So working with my client, I immediately on the second day called them and said, guys, we can't sit around, twiddle our thumbs and wait for this to come back up. We need to make a move and pivot and look to see if there's any other clearinghouses that we could rapidly implement. They were in agreement with that strategy. So basically got on the phone, started calling some clearinghouses. Of course, I'm sure they were getting a lot of calls and didn't really understand how to respond. One clearinghouse, Waystar, responded immediately, said they could get us up and running in 2 weeks and claims submitted. So we went ahead, went through the contract, got that fast tracked, ready to start submitting claims, and we found out that we had a non-compliant 837 file. Nobody knew. Change was consuming the file, and if it was non-compliant, they were making their own changes and possibly not communicating back to us. So lots of band-aids were done previously, and again, all of that implementation with Change Healthcare was before the Infinix timeline or with our partnership. So we were unaware of that as well. So we did get, there was a little setback. We had to get some programmers to go make some changes to the 837 file. But as we were doing that, we also looked for other ways to submit claims. And we did find that Ability was offering a service where we can manually upload claims. So we worked on that while we were going through the Waystar implementation. We wanted to minimize the downtime as much as possible. I also had the billing team manually keying claims into the DDE system. And then for our payers that allowed manual keying of claims, we had that too. So we looked for obviously high dollars. Those are going to be the most impactful.
Mhm.
But long story short, we were up and running in less than 29 days. On 3/29, March 29th, we were fully operational with Waystar and submitting claims. And by the end of April, we were back to baseline cash flow.
Wow.
Uh, yep. And then going into May and June, we started seeing our rebound. We all the cash that we missed out during March, we started seeing that rebound. We're still not there. We're not fully 100% recovered. We're about 64% recovered. So we still not out of the woods. Still got a long way to go, but we had a very, very small blip in our operations as well as our cash flow.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So I know a lot of providers out there can't say that at all. So we all know that the Change Healthcare incident has been very significant throughout the whole industry. Still, you just mentioned it. This is not fully recoverable, but there's others that are still far worse. I think the projected cost so far is about 2.3 billion for 2024. And this ripple effect, as we say it again, is reaching a lot of consumers, including the need for credit monitoring. So, from your experience, how has this attack affected the industry at large? What can other organizations, learn from it? I think you've alleviated on a little bit, but I didn't know if there was any other um, lessons learned, so to speak.
Yeah. From my perspective and from an operations perspective, having documented backup plans, knowing exactly what to do, should some of your technology fail on you. If we look at the clinical space, they all have downtime procedures documented. Um, we got to do the same in revenue cycle. So when a billing system goes down and you're unable to submit claims, what do you have available to you? Are there payer portals that you can drop a file to? Start talking to your provider reps. Um, if you have, if it's in your budget, look to alternative clearinghouses.
Mhm.
Maybe there's other ways that you can keep that relationship going. Maybe you send some of your claims through one clearinghouse and keep and send another set of claims to another clearinghouse. Have those options available to you so that you can pivot
Mhm.
at a moment's notice. Another
Wow.
another thing I think we really need to look at, and this comes from our leadership in our government. We all know healthcare is highly regulated. I also think that from my experience, by not having a non-compliant 837 file, that's a big issue. And I think that these billing scrubbers need to become agnostic to a point where, if something like this happens, all you got to do, and you don't have a contingency plan in place, all you have to do is pick up the phone or go to a website and say, hey, I'm going to start directing my claims to you.
Right.
So a lot of times we see, for the most part, the functionality's there. Everything, these clearinghouses do the same thing. They scrub claims, they transmit them to the payers, but their processes are different, and the way that they consume these 830 files can be different. So it's
Right.
got to be an agnostic system, and I'm hoping somebody is paying attention to that, and that is, part of the lessons learned post-mortem after what's happened with change.
Right, exactly. I mean, 837 is supposed to be a standard format, and I remember in the days and that it was called NSF for National Standard Format, but we all joked back then that it was National Similar Format because everyone
Yes.
kind of had their own proprietary twist on it. So they came out with the concept of the 837 file that was supposed to be agnostic. but still everyone puts their little proprietary twist on that file and it makes it difficult. It could be a PM system, it could be a clearinghouse, it could be an EHR, it could be any, everyone just kind of has a little extra that they've added to it to make it proprietary. So it's very frustrating, very frustrating. And to be able to battle that, to your point, standardization and having them agnostic is absolutely key. Hopefully we'll get there someday for sure. You've mentioned the necessity of having backup clearinghouses. I've heard you say that over and over, but I can imagine the cost associated with maintaining a backup. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit as to how you could manage and mitigate the cost of having two clearinghouses?
Yeah, I think that this all comes down to your negotiation abilities with that clearinghouse. No, that's a really good question, Stuart. And from my perspective, what I would try to do is maybe split the business between the two clearinghouses. So I have maybe my government payers going through one clearinghouse and having all my commercial and managed care payers going through another. A lot of times these clearinghouses is set up on is subscription based. So maybe getting that subscription down to a reasonable amount, and then the highest cost is usually your maintenance fees. Keeping the system up, being able to keep the connections with the payers. So I think a lot of that is, just having those conversations with the clearinghouse and giving them, hey, I want to have you as a backup, or I want to split the business between you two. What can we do from a cost perspective to make this more doable and reasonable for our organization?
Yeah, that makes sense. Total sense. And then um, looking at, like you mentioned, the 837 files, and making that just as an example of the agnostic approach that is needed here. But can you just elaborate a little bit on the challenges to ensure that the data integrity and was compliant? As something as simple as the 837 file and making them compatible with
Yeah.
different clearinghouses.
Yeah, what we found with our client was they used the Cerner system, and there were some loops and segments that were related to some of the physician data that was coming over. There were some. I'm not a technical guy, so I'm trying to remember exactly what the term was, but there were some trailing loop and segments that were not in the 837 file. And what happened was Change was accepting it in that format. And then we never had a conversation with Change to see what they were doing. These were all assumptions because we didn't have any problems getting that file into Change ever, or a claim to a payer. So once we took that and brought it over to Waystar, they identified 7 major issues that were wrong with the file. So there was missing data, loops and segments, and we had to take all of that back and find out why Cerner wasn't populating that in the 837, and then do programming changes to make that happen.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I know that's a lot of work. I mean, you just said it in a sentence, but I know it's much harder than what you just described in a sentence
Yes.
to make
Yes.
that happen. Yeah, there's a lot of effort going in there. So, and then again, going back to the dual clearinghouse concept, these are competitors that sometimes don't play nice together. Going back to kind of your agnostic, comment. But what are some of the key considerations when implementing this strategy on how dual clearinghouses can bring that operational continuity during a cyber attack?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I understand the question completely. So, like,
Yeah,
have like for like function. functionality.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like, how do dual clearinghouses contribute to that continuity during a cyber attack? What are some of those key considerations when implementing this strategy? You've touched on them a little bit already, but I'm looking at it from the standpoint of them being competitors and playing nice with each other.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're gonna, your edits are built off of the way that you run your clinical operations, your charging operations, your registration operations, et cetera. So, having both sets, the same type of edits within both clearinghouses. You can't have one clearinghouse that uses this set of edits versus what this clearinghouse is using. A lot of times these clearinghouses will use national edits, and they do differ. We're finding that out as well as we go through we're seeing far more edits in Waystar than we did in Change Healthcare. So a lot of that is, what the clearinghouses learn from the payers, making sure that all of your LCDs, all your CCI edits match each other. If you're using dual scrubbers, and using one of them for a backup plan, because last thing you want to do is pivot to your backup clearinghouse, and then they don't have the same edits, and then it results in denials, or rejections that you have to work through. So I think making sure that there's like for like functionality, making sure that the edits are very close to each other or almost exact, and making sure that you follow the same processes that your EHR requires. So if you
Gotcha.
have to bring it back into your EHR, can you bring the same type of data back in?
Mhm. Perfect. And so in what you've described, certainly there's a lot of manual processes that played crucial roles during the initial response to the cyber attack. But how did you balance manual processes with automation? Kind of bring automation into the conversation. And what lessons did you learn, from this approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be able to manage our manual submission, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we did use Avality in the short term while we were going through Waystar. And this was grabbing the 837 file and uploading it to their website. Well, what comes with that is Avality would send us back payer responses, which are called 999s. And those are intended to go back into your EHR and update that claim as transmitted, meaning that it's been sent to the payer. Now it's in an AR status, and you're waiting for payment. So when that happened, these 999s started coming in rapidly because payers were accepting our claims. I mean, we had thousands of them. And we knew that to effectively manage this going forward and to be able to give Waystar a clean file once we went live, we needed to go back into the EHR and make sure all the claims that we filed through Avality were tagged as transmitted. So I did not have the manpower to be able to do this manually. Again, we had thousands of these 999s. So what we did is we were able to collect all those 999s, and we had, in separate files. We turned those over to our automation team, which was able to pull out all of the information from the 999 that needed to go back into the EHR. And then we were able to automate that through scripting, and then send that to the EHR and update those claims.
Wow.
And we did that once we figured out what we needed from the 999s, because relatively they're all the same. So we knew we could go scrape and pull data from specific fields. And then we knew what the parameters were to go back into the EHR.
Wow.
So we created that file and we did that pretty quickly. I think we did it within 3 days.
That's amazing. And it's also a testament to just the ingenuity, because that's something you wouldn't think about automating until you needed it, right? So
Right,
it's
right.
having that flexibility and that agility to just pivot and say, okay, wow, we need something fast. And then the team responded and created something specific for that. So that's just a good example of how automation just made a huge difference in improving this process for you. I'm sure it saved you a lot of FTE time, so to speak.
Yeah, we tried it when they first started trickling in. It was like, oh, this is manageable. And then all of a sudden, it was like the floodgates opened one day, and
Wow.
I
Yeah.
just started getting them. And I was like, nope, we're not going to be able to do this with the manpower.
Yeah. I can imagine. Well, we've already discussed earlier. I mean, I think, the prediction is that it's going to be 2.3 billion. I think it's worth stating that again. That's billion with a big B for 2024 alone. And then you mentioned, the client recovery for this particular client was 64% of the cash shortfall, right?
Yes.
So what advice would you give to other organizations facing this similar challenge? Like how did your team help this particular client recover that 64% in their cash shortfall? And then what advice would you add to that for someone facing the same situation?
Yeah, absolutely. We as soon as we went live with Waystar, it was all hands on deck. So lots of manual effort. Um, we had overtime that was allocated to all our billing staff. We had some of our back end AR management team helping, making sure that after we transmitted claims, payers had them. Um, what my advice is in my mindset was we weren't going to sit around and wait. We weren't going to for Change Healthcare to come back up. And I think today I'm still on the Change Healthcare emails. I'm not convinced that they're 100% reconnected to all payers. I mean, I'm getting emails daily telling their customers that they just now got reconnected, and we're already in at the end of July.
Right.
So the thing is don't sit around and wait for these guys to get back up and running. Don't feel sorry for yourself. You got to take action, and
Right.
having the contingencies in place, looking at dual clearinghouses, making sure that you have written documentation on how to approach downtime processes should something like this happen again.
Right. Yeah, you can't wait for, someone to come in on the white horse
Right.
and rescue you. And if you're waiting on the vendor, this applies to any vendor in something catastrophic like this. You got to act because, minor things, a support issue, sure. Everyone's used to doing a support ticket, getting it resolved. Goes well beyond any support ticket. So this was
Yeah, this
definitely
this
different.
affects the organization's
Mhm.
livelihood, right?
Right.
Whether
Right.
they can continue to sustain and keep their doors open. And that we knew that of our client. They run
Mhm.
on a very small margin. Every dollar counts. And I wasn't going to sit back and just say, well, we'll see what happens. I'm glad they took my advice. I think they look back now and say that was probably the best decision we could have made.
Mhm.
Glad we did it. But now we need to start rebounding. And like I said, the 64% that we've been recovered, lots of hard work doing that, working, we had edits, working our denials manually, etc. Still got a long way to go, but we'll get this client there.
Perfect. Perfect. Awesome. Well, Rick, that kind of concludes the we're pretty close to the episode. Only thing left is the Q&A. Just want to remind everyone to submit your questions in the Q&A that you had anything based on the content that you heard today. We do have one question here, Rick. We've talked a lot about clearinghouses, as I read this question, but not a whole lot about specific payers. And so this question is, are there any specific payers that helped you navigate and rebound during the recovery?
Wow, that's a great question. It seemed that we had to reach out to a lot of most of the payers to see what their plan was. If there was any assistance that they could provide, was there going to be any exceptions for timely filing? And then we had a handful of payers that took the initiative to reach out to us to say, hey, we know you guys are going through this. Here's what we're offering. I would not, there wasn't any one particular payer that I'm aware of that was with us all along the way. Now, we'll see what happens. We're starting to get some timely filing denials, and we're going to appeal them. And we're gonna, the appeal basis will be off the Change Healthcare cyber attack, and we'll see if they stand up and honor what they committed to.
And that's awesome. That's awesome. So yeah, sometimes you have to just remind the payers, hey, something big happened. So there's a reason why you didn't get this claim in a timely manner. So awesome. So I don't see any other questions. Really appreciate everyone joining us today for this episode of Office Hours. Rick, want to thank you so much for joining us. So we'll have him on again. He did really, really well. Oh, there's one question that snuck in here. Okay, yeah, this is a question from Susan. So if they do not accept responsibility, can we bill the patients? I guess they mean the payer.
Accept responsibility for or making an exception to timely filing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's all going to be based on your contractual agreement with that payer. So if you're allowed to bill that the patient, by all means, I think you take that that course of action. But I think it's going to be more around what your contract says.
Right, right. That makes sense. All right, Susan, hopefully that answered your question. All right, and with that, we're going to conclude this session, or this episode of Office Hours. Rick, again, as I was saying, thank you for being on. You did great, so you can anticipate coming on again in the future for sure.
All right, thanks, Stuart.
I really appreciate all your knowledge and expertise on this critical subject. And for that, we'll see everyone next week on another episode.